You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello, everyone. This is another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we're going to take a little bit of a detour from the business-centric theme that most of our shows are. I periodically like to bring on a guest that can talk to us about keeping us well-rounded in both a kind of a health and mental conditioning way. And I've got just such a guest today. His name is Jonathan McLernon. Jonathan, welcome.
Hey, thanks, man. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so Jonathan's story caught my eye as I was looking at my source files, so to speak. And by the way, I'm going to put a plug out to Alex over at Podmatch. I have become a user of his platform and have found just a world of real high quality, exciting people to meet and to talk to. I hope you guys out in the audience are agreeing that it's a good boost. And Jonathan, you're one of the guys I identified there, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of Podmatch as well, to the extent that I actually created a walkthrough video of 4 different podcast matching platforms and got published in Pod News for doing that. It's a newsletter. It went out to more than 20,000 people, and so it's got a really good response. And of course, top of the list is Podmatch, because not only do they do everything well, they do it in a very, very efficient way. So they've created a really efficient platform. Correct.
They've added the feature of I call it dating service for pod people.
Yeah.
It's just not to digress here on the topic, but for those that might be listening and have an interest in getting into the podcasting world, what Alex has done over there is created an opportunity for hosts and guests to kind of meet. We share profile data, and with an algorithm, he does some prospective matching of identifying people that might be good guests on a show or vice versa. So it's just a really neat platform, and I've been doing this a while, and I've used several of the others, and not to say anything disparaging about the others. They're good, but this is just a little bit better. So
it's a head and shoulders above. Yeah, they've taken what the industry did well and innovated, which is a really great thing. They said, okay, these people are doing it well. How do we innovate and do it better? And I think that's a great business strategy, because sometimes we hear something like innovation and think we have to entirely reinvent something that's never been thought of before. But it's like, can you do it more efficiently? Can you do it a little bit better? Can you provide a bit more value?
Exactly.
So
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, kudos to Alex, and I'll be sure to send him a copy of this so he can see see the results. But back to the topic at hand here, John. Give us the backstory first on who you are and how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Well, yeah, in a coconut-sized nutshell, I really have quite a diverse background, from nanotechnology researcher in inorganic chemistry to Navy Marine engineer to globetrotting nomad to powerline technician, supplement store owner, and now an online nutrition coach with a focus on what I call brain-driven weight loss. And it's really, I've just recently ticked over 40, and this work that I do now is sort of the culmination of my last 10 or 11 years of personal struggle. I went through a traumatic experience about 11 years ago, and due to that experience, I fell into binge eating and food addiction as a way of coping with my trauma. It's kind of a PTSD response. And along with that came some mental health struggles around anxiety and depression as well, and just really struggling to function. And so
you were just a hot mess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So I gained about 120 pounds and really struggled for many years to lose that weight. And, eventually about 2017, I hired a coach who really helped me through a lot of he showed me the issue wasn't about food. The issue wasn't about, lack of supplements. It wasn't about a specific exercise routine or things like that. So he really shone a light on what was actually missing in my human experience. And it really altered my perspective on even how I approach working with people. I used to hand people macros and meal plans and calorie counts and stuff like that, but like that's not what people are looking for. Those are very inhuman variables. And so the work that I do is a very human-centric work.
Well, let's dive in. What is the core element of your program and principles that is different?
Yeah. Well, what I like to say is that I marry the science of metabolism, because obviously that still matters, with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection, which is really the glue that holds it all together. And so the science of metabolism is kind of maybe more the inhuman variables. We might look at different ways and different sort of adjusting your food intake, for example. But along with that, we look at, okay, where might you struggle to implement it, and how might you more effectively or efficiently implement this? So that's when we get into the psychology of behavior change. How do our behavior patterns form, and how do we change behavior patterns that we might be stuck in? So we look at that from like a sort of a psychological or brain-based perspective. But then we draw in the human element, and we go, in the process of trying to create change, we're very likely to struggle. And the very process of creating change means that we're going to trigger things from our past, and we're going to trigger sort of these emotional incidents and events. And it's our our older primal brain trying to protect us and shield us and prevent us from making change. So if we kind of understand that the process of actually creating transformation in our life is really kind of a messy, bumpy process. It's not this sort of, smooth gliding along like everything's perfect. It's a struggle.
Right. Well, you're right. I run into change challenges with a lot of my clients, whether they are literally trying to steer an organization in a new direction or implement a new culture. I've had a couple of those assignments, and it is the old adage, people hate change. But what I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of brain science on why that is true.
Yeah, that's so. In one sense, on the surface, it looks like the people hate change. So I like to go a layer deeper and go, well, what's really going on here? Why does their brain resist change? So if we look at it from sort of a more primal perspective, we could say we needed familiarity for safety for most of our human existence. So if you were going to go around the corner, the backside of a mountain, there was no electricity or internet. You didn't know what was back there. Wild animals, traps, hostile tribes, things like that. So familiarity is equated to safety. So when we go to create change, we're leaving the safety of familiarity as well as moving into the relative unsafety of unfamiliarity. And that's an uncomfortable process. So now if we try to do that alone, it feels even more difficult because that primal mechanism gets triggered again because we're now making ourselves vulnerable. But when we connect to another supportive human being who essentially has our back, now it becomes a little bit safer to create change because it's safe to be vulnerable and go through that process.
Well, this may really be kind of a simplistic question, but why is it then that we as humans, if we want to look at weight loss as our target, why is it that we used to be comfortable at 30, 50, 70 pounds lighter? Why isn't it easy to go back there mentally?
Well, if we look at, I like to look at the sort of the biology of it. So our biology is what we call a famine biology. So we're wired to seek out foods that are calorie dense. Now, of course, that biology doesn't take into account the existence of modern hyper-processed, super palatable foods. So these foods have been engineered to actually take advantage of that part of our brain. Because it's extremely difficult for us to regulate their consumption. It's very easy to overconsume these foods. Because from our brain's perspective, from a famine survival perspective, eating calorie-dense foods is a good thing. But we've like super solved the problem. We've leapt way past like the necessary solution.
Yeah, the last fitness guy I had on the show, it's been a number of months. We were talking about the fact that modern food technology, they've identified 5 key elements that make us crave food. It's the salty, crunchy, sweet, creamy, and there's a 5th one, and I'm forgetting it. But if you think about your favorite snack food, it's got two or three of those elements going on at the same time, which makes it uber appealing to those senses.
Yeah. Yeah. So our biology wants to store fat from a famine survival perspective, because what we normally did throughout history, we didn't have food security, we didn't have refrigeration, we had limited long-term food storage ability. So our food storage was actually body fat. That was how we stored necessary calories, and we can store vitamins and minerals and other useful things within our fat cells. So when we go to consume those fat cells, because food is scarce, we release some of these helpful vitamins and minerals and so on. So it's when we think about it that way, we go, it actually makes sense. So when we go to lose weight, we're actually trying to go against our biology, because our biology is not wired to live in a food abundant society. So we are trying to engineer, could we say, like a mini famine, where we trigger our body's response that it's necessary to consume fat. But our brain will drive us to do the opposite of it. It will create all kinds of resistance because it's seen as a threat to our safety to actually use up our emergency energy reserve, if we could think of body fat like that.
So how does someone who maybe has struggled with that, using all the conventional ways, diets, pills, lotions, and potions to try to get past all that, how do they get started with what it is you're recommending to do?
Yeah, the first thing that I encourage people to do is to start becoming aware of their behavior patterns. So our brains receive 11 million bits of information of sensory input per second. 11 million bits of sensory input per second. But our conscious brain only processes about 50 per second, which is already pretty amazing. But there's no way on earth that we could possibly process all of those inputs. So a lot of it is relegated to the unconscious part of our brain. So we don't even think about it. Now, again, that's done from an energy efficiency perspective. If we can automate a behavior and not have to think about it, we expend less energy doing it. So now, in order to create change, we have to take some of these unconscious behavior patterns we have and start to make ourselves aware of them. So it could be as simple as starting to take photographs of your meals. That's one of the first things I start with my clients, because that action triggers the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of cognitive processing, conscious processing takes place. So we want to trigger that. And then that allows us to reflect. But now, if we have an unhealthy relationship with food, it's going to start to trigger the emotions around it, maybe a sense of shame or guilt around the choices we're making and so on. And so we have to work through those as well. Now, normally the response is to consume food as an emotional anesthetic. I don't like what I'm feeling, so now I'm going to consume food to change what I'm feeling, and so on. And this is where coaching becomes like we're trying to navigate these tricky waters. And on the back side of that is a primal brain that, if we try to introduce too much change, will create all kinds of resistance, because too much change feels unsafe. So that's why we're blending all three of these things together. Like I said, the psychology of behavior change, the compassion of human connection, and then the science of metabolism.
So for those of us, and I'll throw myself on the pile, because I definitely have some of those struggles myself. What I'm thinking of is, myself and friends, there's certain things in our pantry and in our kitchen and in our fridge that we might be, you could call it, addicted to.
Yeah.
I'm a Texas boy and I love myself some sweet tea, but if I don't make it naturally at home, which I seldom do, if I go to the store bought, I've got a lot of probably overloaded sugar content in those things, probably making it more sugar rich than some sodas you could buy.
Absolutely, yeah.
So as you work through trying to figure out what the intake is that's causing the biggest problem, how do you start breaking down those kind of, again, I'll call them addictions?
Sure. Well, we can look at the sweet tea example, right? So we might say, okay, well, when is it that you consume it? When does your brain start asking you for
all
this?
Day long.
All day long. And is there a particular trigger, right? So is it like, I'm thirsty, so now I want sweet tea, for example. And then we look at, okay, let's look at your environment. So how available is it? Do you have like bottles of it stocked in your fridge, or would you have to go to the store? So we look at, because if we think about willpower, for example, because we often say, well, I just need more willpower. Well, if you have to exercise 1,000 times a day, it's going to get awfully tiring. So if it's in your house, you maybe say, well, I shouldn't do this because I recognize it's not healthy. After 100 times of doing this, you're going to say, well, I'll worry about it tomorrow. I'm tired of the fight. I'm tired of the fight against my sort of using my willpower. So then we go, okay, well, could we shape your environment? So this is now starting to look at environmental design in our house. Like, can we shape this so that it supports the way that you want to go, nudges you in the right direction? Well, maybe you could get a bottle of sweet tea, for example, and then you have an empty bottle and you split it half and half and you dilute the rest of it with water. Well, now you're still getting a sweet tea, but you've changed the flavor profile slightly, but you're still kind of getting what you're looking for, and you're getting yourself used to it. And you could gradually work on sort of diluting it, and that sort of thing, until you get accustomed to a slightly different flavor. It takes about 2 weeks to sort of shift our palate. And so you would look at, instead of, say, going cold turkey and saying, no, you can't consume sweet tea. Like, okay, if you're a diabetic and there's actually significant risk factors, okay, you might have to go cold turkey and just suffer through it. But if you're not at that place yet, we could look at, okay, is there a way we could work with you to kind of wean you off of that and look at, okay, what does that mean? What need is that meeting for you? And can we find a substitute for you to still get what you're looking for, instead of just trying to go cold turkey and fight the cravings?
So some programs I'm familiar with, they try to attack what might be your classic cravings. How does the notion of craving different things, how does that fit into your program?
Well, here's how I would think about cravings. So first of all, we have let's look at how our brain forms behaviors. We have what's known as the habit loop, and so there's usually a cue or a trigger, and then the craving is the second part of it. So the cue suggests you should do something, and the brain goes, yes, that's desirable, I want that. Then you have the response. I go and say, drink the sweet tea. And then the fourth part is the reward. I get a reward from that. But there's actually like a fifth part of this, and that is the story that we tell ourselves about our behavior. So our brain takes our actions and tries to make meaning of it and tell a story, and we actually create a belief based on that. So for example, you might say, I'm addicted to sweet tea. That's a thought that you hold to be true. So we can call that a belief. Now that belief becomes a filter for your brain. That's one of the ways your brain separates what to think about and what not to think about. So let's say I'm stressed, I drink sweet tea, I feel better. Really basic loop, right? So then the next time you're stressed, if I say you can't have sweet tea, now I'm just stressed and I feel like crap.
Okay.
Right. So the behavior is solving a problem. So I'm stressed, I try to resist it, I break down and I drink it. The cravings get too strong because the brain says that sweet tea was doing something for me. Maybe it was relieving some stress. It was helping you to, you crack a bottle of sweet tea, sit down in your favorite chair, take a sip of that cold beverage, that sweetness hits you. That's the cue to relax. So there's a reward that comes beyond just the taste of it, right? It triggers sort of a relaxation loop. Now, if you take that away and say you can't have it and you can't have a substitute, you're going to get cravings. And eventually your brain's going to scream like a toddler and you're going to go, the only way I'm going to shut this thing up is to have a sip of that sweet tea. And you go back and you do that. But then you go, now you start to tell yourself the story. I must be addicted to sweet tea. So now if that becomes a belief, that belief actually starts to reinforce your behavior or guide your behavior. Well, if I'm addicted to sweet tea, what does a sweet tea addict do? Well, they drink sweet tea every day. Better have sweet tea in the house and so on. So it's this. So you look at there's all these different kind of areas where you could look at this pattern and go, is there somewhere where we can put a wedge in there to maybe interrupt that loop that's taking place?
Do you find people respond better to this kind of change effort with group association, or can they be successful independently and by themselves going into it?
I have a bit of both going on. So I do have a community where we can connect and create support, but I find that a lot of this work kind of needs to take place more in an intimate one-to-one capacity because. Let's say, for example, maybe you were really ashamed of your sweet tea drinking habit and you didn't want to talk about it with anybody else. I need to, in a sense, create, I don't like the term, but we'll say a safe space. A space where we don't trigger your brain's defense mechanism, essentially. And when we're surrounded by other people, even if we sort of think they're supportive, if there's any inkling that we might receive judgment about our behavior, That's it. We shut it down. We're not talking about this. So this is why I bring in compassion as a part of the work that I do. So compassion is not let's let you off the hook or a get out of jail free card. But what it is let's remove judgment. Now let's look at the behavior without judgment and with curiosity so that we can try to understand why it's happening. Because if we say that all behavior makes sense, so if I know, so some of your emotional backstory and I know how the brain works, I can piece together why the behavior is occurring. And so now it's not a case of I have no willpower, I'm an idiot, or anything like that. It's that this is me needing your brain. And so we look at it through a different perspective.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Jonathan, it's hard to believe. We're kind of up on a midway point of the show. Yeah. And when we're going to take a commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to dive further into this program and this idea of allowing your brain to help you make these major life changes. So we'll be right back.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
Well, hello, everyone. We're back again, and I am talking with Jonathan McLernon. We are talking about some health and fitness ideas. Jonathan has a life story of his own that has guided him to some change that has become more permanent, and that's what we're talking about, is the idea of how do our brains help us create permanent change that can have that lifelong effect. I raised the question, Jonathan. I had my own personal experience a number of years ago joining a gym that turned out to be more of a CrossFit mode, I guess you would call it. There was a lot of group dynamic. Workouts were in group settings, and our goal setting was public. We wrote things on the board, and we marked our milestones and had little mini celebrations and things. But because of the intensity of the workout, and by the way, I was 63 when I started that program. So imagine a 63-year-old man in a CrossFit gym. And having never done that ever before, it did lead to some.
There's a high risk of injury.
It was a high risk, and that's exactly what happened. Broke a foot and blew out a knee and did some other things. But I did make some progress. But what I discovered was it was not long lasting. I had not really internalized the need or the success of the change that had happened. On retrospect, I was doing it more for that community performance kind of thing. I didn't want to show up for the weigh-in having not lost any weight. It was that kind of a motivator for me. So talk to us a little bit about that motivation aspect of all this.
Right. Well, that's really interesting because we've been, in one sense, conditioned to really glorify the performative mindset. But it's like and it's actually maybe a good business model when you think about it. It's like, I have to go there to get my motivation because outside of it, it's not happening. And so it's almost like getting you kind of hooked on that. But that's what we call, as you know, an extrinsic motivator. It's not an intrinsic motivator. And if we want to create change that sticks, there has to be an internal change take place. And what it sounds like is what you were going through there, you weren't really internalizing it. You were kind of, and I think an injury like that, in one sense, it was inevitable. Because when we get into a group environment like that, it can be a really positive thing. However, it can also cause us to disregard our body's warning signals. And this is not placing blame on anybody, but in that environment when it's sort of this dopamine fueled, going for goals and pushing to achieve, yourself to your limit and stuff like that. And they'll talk about safety, but ultimately, because we're wired with sort of a group dynamic type brain, we're going to want to go along with the tribe. And so that means we're going to disregard some of it doesn't really give us the space to go, hey, you know what? I got to back off a bit today. And maybe that happened from time to time. But ultimately, of course, so an injury very rarely just comes out of nowhere, like just totally accidental. We can often chain it back to there was a series of events kind of leading up to setting you up for this to happen. So if we want to internalize it, we don't want to make motivation the foundation of our success plan, because motivation, we can't really rely on it. If you have to go to the gym to that community in order to be motivated, it's not something you can rely on. You need to be able to cultivate it within yourself. And we actually want to go beyond motivation. So part of it is, in the beginning we talked about making ourselves aware of our unhelpful behavior patterns. Well, we actually want to do this now in reverse, is we want to wire in helpful behavior patterns and make them automatic. That's what we want to be able to do. So we actually remove motivation from the equation. So we can engineer our environment, in a sense, design our environment, as well as we can practice specific behaviors until they become a habit, and we don't have to rely on motivation. And so the way that I approach this is really with kind of like we would call it an iterative mindset or an adjustment mindset, flexible, like a no-fail kind of mindset. So it's this idea that, okay, let's start with a principle. I want you to try to implement that principle, and then you're going to give me feedback and tell me how it works for you. So in other words, you're not just doing this because I told you and you have to do exactly what I say. It's rather, this is now a collaborative partnership. You implement this, you give me feedback. How is this working? How do we adjust it for you? So once it works for you, now we have that principle in place and it works for you. You're not just doing it because I told you to. And I think that's where this gets different. And then what we do is we start to stack that and we start to create a cumulative effect where you are, in a sense, reverse engineering your own healthy lifestyle, and I'm just guiding you along that way.
I realize everybody, their physical makeup, their metabolism, their biology is different, but is there I guess I'll call it an average curve on outcome that as people join your program and get deep into it, is there what does the time horizon look like when they start seeing some results and, moving toward some goals they might have?
Well, it can really depend on the individual and what their goal is. And some people can see results very quickly. But I really, in one sense, I almost want to caution against that. And the reason for that is, and this has been my experience many times over. I've been doing this for a number of years. When we go into this and go hard because we want those early results, those rapid results, that quick gratification, our brain loves this stuff, but it means we're doing something we can't keep doing. And ultimately we burn out and we crash and burn. So we get caught in this cycle of push hard for, a few weeks or a couple of months and then crash and burn and undo everything we did. And then when we get back in, I got to push hard again. I just need more will and so on. And so I really try and encourage people to take a slightly different approach, where we go, we're gonna make incremental improvements over time that feel really small, but they're cumulative in effect. So that at no point in time does it feel like there's no way I could do this. It's too overwhelming. And so we almost have to unlearn this idea of going pedal to the metal in the beginning and say, what this is really about is, again, cultivating a lifestyle that we hardly have to think about to keep doing it. And that's the one that's going to stick and produce. Because, hey, I could tie you to a tree and starve you for 3 months, but there's no way those results are sticking. And it's I want you to keep those results 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so when we look at for example, I have a client who was 61 and she lost about 50 pounds, and that took about 9 months. And she's kept that weight off for another 2 years. I still keep in touch with her. Now, if I'd have told her that, hey, we can do this in 4 months, she'd be really disappointed by the fact that it took 9 months to lose 50 pounds. But here she's ecstatic because she's lost the weight and kept it off. And it doesn't feel like she has to make a monumental effort to do it. So we're really taking a longer term perspective. And so I want people to encourage people to move away from this idea of I need to get results in 3 months or less. You really can't make transformative long-term change in a 3-month window of time. You need more time.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the idea I've heard physical fitness coaches say this, well, it took you 20 years to get here. You can't fix it in 3 months.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing. So you talk about what you were doing there, and I like to say something along the lines of if your diet or your workout has an expiry date, so do your results. So if you're embarking on a path because you think it's going to get you to let's say your goal weight faster, but you can't keep doing it, you don't keep those results either. Because we have sometimes this thought that I'll just push really hard till I get to my goal weight and then I'll flip over to cruise control. But it doesn't quite work like that. And it has to do with our brain and how our brain learns and how our brain wires in habits and behavior patterns. And the more complex it is, whatever it is we're trying to learn, the longer it takes to sort of wire it in. And so we really want to embrace small, simple changes. And then I go back to this iterative or this no-fail type flexible mindset where when something isn't working, we don't throw it away. We say, how do I have to adjust it? How do I need to adjust to make it work for me? Because I'm not building you a 3-month life. I think after 3 months, you want to keep living. I think maybe you want to live another 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So why not build with that in mind?
So how much of all this does ultimately come down to the substance and quantity of what we put in our mouths?
Look, it's still going to boil down to that, and we really want to tackle this with a reductive mindset. And I'm a former research scientist, so of course I like to do this too, right? I say, look, we could crunch it right down to you should eat this many grams of protein, this many grams of carbohydrate, and this many grams of fat a day. But ultimately, when we try to distill it down to just inhuman variables, inevitably this effort fails because we're not accounting for the complete human experience. We're not accounting for your social environment, your relational environment, and your professional environment, and so on. And so we need to, when we get back to sort of the viability issue here, because yes, we can reduce it right down to calories in, calories out. There's people out there that will try to argue with it and say, look, at the end of the day, if you want to burn fat, or if you want to lose fat, because we don't just want to lose weight, we actually want to lose body fat or adipose tissue, we need to consume less than we burn. Now, the other factor, though, but if we try to reduce it to that simplistic model, our body adapts. So let's say we reduce our calorie intake and we start playing and tinkering with numerical variables. Our body, remember, we're wired to survive famines. Our body adapts. It lowers our energy output, even independent of movement. And so it's, in one sense, yes, we could say it's as simple as calories in, calories out. But it doesn't, again, we really struggle to make that translate into real world results because the human creature, animal, being is actually we're quite a complex organism.
So what I'm hearing there is just tinkering with the numbers of intake, trying to trick it. Your body ultimately is going to shift down, and you may actually become lethargic and low energy because your body doesn't want to do anything extra.
Yeah. So when we often see maybe physique athletes, for example, whether they're a bodybuilder or a fitness model or something like that, and these often get glamorized and glorified on social media because they have really attractive physiques and it's nice to look at them. But ultimately, in order for them to achieve what they do, they usually have to have some synthetic assistance. And this is not me denigrating them. I was involved in the bodybuilding world. I understand how this works. In order for them to go against their biology, because in order to have visible ab definition, you're really fighting your biology. Because in history, warriors didn't look like those guys from 300, the movie.
Yeah.
They would have been big and strong, but they would have been chunky too.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have skinny warriors, you have a problem. You have warriors that are very vulnerable to dying.
Right. Right.
And so in order to achieve that look, you have to fight so hard against your biology that you almost always require some sort of synthetic assistance to create an aesthetic look that ultimately is impossible to sustain outside of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, going back to what you said, if I'm following it right, our bodies are designed to store fat for that energy burst it needs in the time of survival. And
our beautiful biology is just, we can survive famines. We're incredibly resilient. It's almost ironic that we're sitting here fighting against the abundance of food. If we were trying to engineer a society that was going to make us obese, we've done it. We've won. We've solved it. Right. Because we think about how technology has taken over the need for physical movement. Well, from a famine survival perspective, that's a good thing. You can literally tap a couple buttons in your smartphone and food comes to your door. We've reduced the effort down to that.
Right. Yeah. We don't even have to get up, go to the store and push the shopping cart for a 20 or 30 minutes.
So from a survival perspective, that's a huge win. But from a long-term sort of biological health perspective, it's not, because our primal brain doesn't like struggle, but we're kind of wired to struggle. And this is the part that we don't often want to talk about, is that we're actually wired to struggle and we thrive in struggle. It's not that we want to make our lives unnecessarily difficult or unnecessarily complex. I'm not suggesting that. But we need some element of stress and struggle to grow and thrive and be our best. And so once we accept that, we go, okay, it's going to be a bit uncomfortable, but it's also worth it because that's where we find meaning and purpose in what we're doing.
So speaking of the struggle, then in your program, is there a workout component that goes with it, a recommended, regimen of activity?
There is, to a degree. So I have like a whole library of workouts that people can choose from, and I help them maybe choose and it's again very much a trial and error type process, because I work exclusively online and exclusively remotely with people. So I'm not in a gym, I'm not a personal trainer in the gym training with them and whatnot. But I say, I want to know what their energy outputs are to some degree. I want to know what their activity is. That helps me to understand the big picture. What is your athletic energy expenditure look like? Whether it's I go for a 5-minute walk every day, or I train in the gym an hour a week, an hour a day, 5 days a week kind of thing. So that helps me to sort of tailor the recommendations I make, knowing what they're putting out. But my focus is so much more, because we can really only focus, there's only so many variables that we can really focus on with any great attention to detail. And so that's why mine is mostly around the psychology of behavior change, like these parts of the nutrition piece of the puzzle, because the workout side of it is a relatively small contributor to your overall health and weight loss goals.
Yeah, back in that gym setting I described that I went through, they actually told us that 80% of the program has nothing to do with what we're doing in the room there. Mm-mm. It's all behavior outside of the gym.
What are you doing the other 23 hours a day?
Yeah. And meaning, how we look at food and how we consume, and quantity and substance and quality and all Absolutely. Of that. So, last question, and then I know we're kind of running out of time. Again, I'm sharing very personal experience. My wife and I fundamentally hate food prep and cooking. Tell us we've got to go stand in the kitchen for 6 hours on a Sunday to get ready for the week, and we're going to go gag. Forget it. We're out. We're
I am done. Too. I'm out too.
We're done. So I've seen a lot of these programs that have that pretty regimented. They try to identify, they'll create nice, appealing menus, but it still involves cooking. So and all the prep and measure and
well. Again, it's almost like this reductive approach to food. Now, anybody that says to me, food is just fuel, I say, no, it's not. Food is history. It is culture. It is family. It is social life. It is relational. There's so much more to the food and the human experience. And
I like you a lot. Keep going.
Yeah. So when we try to divorce ourselves from that, we're actually removing ourselves from some of the real joy in life, right? So we want to look at that and go, well, hang on a sec. I don't want to lose out on all these other things by eating these meals in a prepackaged container that this much broccoli and this much rice, and I don't want to eat like that. There's more to life than that. But I say, well, how about we change what we approach? So in other words, whatever I choose to eat, I want to maximize the enjoyment I get from it. And it's not going to come from how much of it I consume, but how much I choose to be present with it and enjoy it. And that's been one of the really, really big shifts. So I'm not suggesting that I eat something indulgent every day, but I don't eat like a virtuous monk. I don't eat like the perfect, half your plate vegetables, a quarter plate carbohydrate, a quarter plate protein, every day. That's, in an ideal world, sure, if I was a robot with no emotions, I might eat like that. But in the real world, I like to eat some indulgent things, but I consume them differently now. And I think that's the fundamental difference. So now, day in and day out, we are still somewhat creatures of routine. And I don't like cooking either. You're not getting me in the kitchen for 6 hours to just try to make a bunch of box meals for the week. No, thank you. I'd rather pull my ears off. So instead, I think, okay, well, how do I make cooking simpler and more efficient? So I go, well, what appliances do I have that don't require me to monitor them? And can I make kind of a little bit of a system out of this? Sure. Throw a couple pork chops in the air fryer. A cup of rice or quinoa or whatever in the rice cooker. Put some vegetables and frozen veg in the oven and roast them. And ta-da! That took me less than 10 minutes to sort of whip up, and I have a healthy meal on the go. And so I think and then when it comes time to enjoy something indulgent, cool. Probably put a bit more time and effort into preparing it. And if we do that, we're going to sit down. We're really going to enjoy it. So I think family mealtime. I've got a young son, so family mealtime for us really matters too. We really try to make an effort to make sure that we have dinners together. So in a nutshell, I don't want us to go down the reductive road of food is just fuel. It's not. It's an integral part of the human experience.
I like that. Do you know what? I can honestly say I've never heard a fitness or nutrition advisor say it that way. Never, ever. So
that's really cool.
Kudos to you.
Well, thank you.
And I do have to say your term, I think by and large, I think the approach that's always been taught is the reductive. They want to attack the substance, the mix, carb, fat, protein, and they want to adjust the quantities. Just kind of boom, that's a given. That's where we're going to start. And whether they count calories or count units or whatever they do it's a very reductive mindset.
Well, and this might tie over into some of the work that you do as like a coach or a consultant. The thing is when I started out coaching, I started with, I call them these inhuman variables, because it was what I knew. And the thing is, to really get to the heart of human change and transformation is uncomfortable. It means I'm going to sit with you in uncomfortable conversations about uncomfortable topics. We're going to talk about why it is that you at 3:00 in the morning go into the fridge and chugging half a bottle of sweet tea. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I just mean whatever behavior that you so we're going to wrestle with your demons in the light, so to speak. We're going to go down that road of the uncomfortable human journey, but we're going to do this together. But when we're afraid of that, when we're afraid of experiencing uncomfortable emotions or being present with another person while they experience uncomfortable emotions, we're going to try to go to the inhuman variables, the ones that to create a bit of distance. Hey, just turn this dial over here and this dial over here, rather than have the human experience. And so this is why I coach, because we're creating a relational human experience, and that's where the transformation actually occurs, the stuff that sticks.
I like that, Jonathan. I appreciate that. And for the record, I don't get up at night and go drink my sweet tea. I'm bad during daylight, but it doesn't bother my sleep at all.
Yeah. So, I was just trying to think of a behavior that somebody might be ashamed of.
I'm with you.
Hide.
I'm with you. But well, this has been fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing. Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, freedomnutritioncoach.com is my website, and I have a podcast called Between the Before and After, and that's where we explore people's stories of overcoming significant adversity in their life, not just in the realm of weight loss or health and fitness, but other areas of life too. And so, because really I think coaching is a very human thing, and humans love stories, and we read ourselves into other people's stories. And I share my own story for that reason. I want people to see elements of their struggle in my story and say, I will understand you because I've walked a mile in your shoes. And that's why this works.
Well, I like it, Jonathan. And again, thank you for being on the show. And folks, the contact info for Jonathan will be in the show notes if you didn't catch it as he spoke it. But I also want to remind everybody, if you're listening in audio form right now, we do have the video version of this episode on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and either look me up by name, Doug Thorpe, or the same show title, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. You can see the video version there. It's been a pleasure sharing with you. I hope this has been helpful and insightful for a whole new way of looking at these challenges of making some meaningful changes in your life. If you need help with that, reach out to Jonathan. Be sure to get in touch. And if you somehow can't find him, just let me know and I'll get you hooked up. But thanks again, Jonathan, and everyone, thanks for listening in. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.